Search a flight twice in one afternoon and watch the price move underneath you. Most people's gut reaction is that the airline clocked their browser, tagged it as willing to pay more, and quietly bumped the fare up on the second look. It feels personal because it happens fast, sometimes inside the same hour, sometimes on the same device with the same cookies sitting right there in the browser. That story is almost entirely wrong, and figuring out why matters more than it sounds, because the real machinery behind airline pricing has been running since long before anyone had a browser fingerprint to track in the first place. I spend my time on the other side of systems like this, running proxy pools, managing device farms, testing anti-detect setups against the fraud and bot detection layers that platforms build to keep their systems honest. So when people ask whether clearing cookies or switching to a VPN will unlock a cheaper flight, I've usually already tested it, and I can tell you what's actually happening under the hood, because it's a different animal than the folklore. The myth leads people toward folk remedies. Clear your cookies, open an incognito tab, switch to a different phone. None of it does what people think it does, because none of it is reading what people think it's reading. What's actually setting that number on the screen is a decades-old system of inventory control, built to manage seats, not to manage shoppers. Start with the seat itself. Every seat in coach on a commercial flight isn't sold at one price. It's filed into a stack of fare buckets, each one labeled with the letter code Y, B, M, H, Q, and so on. Each bucket carries its own fare rule and its own fixed number of seats the airline is willing to sell at that level before that bucket closes. The cheapest bucket sells out first. The booking engine closes it, and the very next search on that same flight pulls from a slightly more expensive bucket instead. That has nothing to do with who is searching. It has everything to do with how many seats are left in that bucket at the exact second the query runs. The system deciding how many seats go into each bucket and when to open or close one is called revenue management, and it's old. It dates back to the 1980s, built originally for American Airlines to fight off low-cost competition that was undercutting them on price. The job of a revenue management system is forecasting. Given how this exact flight has historically booked at 60 days out, 30 days out, 14 days out, how many seats should be protected for a late booking business traveler who will pay full fare versus sold off cheap right now to keep the plane from flying half empty. That forecast runs continuously against real bookings as they happen, against competitor fares on the same route, and against load factor targets the airline has set for that flight. That combination, forecast plus live bookings plus competition, is what actually moves the number on the screen. It's a supply curve reacting to thousands of travelers at once, not a profile reacting to one browser tab. Picture a real route to make this concrete. Say a flight from New York to Los Angeles is showing $340 in the cheapest bucket at 9 in the morning. By lunchtime, that bucket might be gone, not because the airline decided the morning searcher deserved a worse deal, but because 30 other people who never coordinated with each other, never even knew the flight existed until they searched, bought into that same bucket over the course of the morning. The afternoon price becomes $380 simply because bucket 1 is empty and bucket 2 is now the cheapest bucket left standing. Run that same search from a different laptop, a different city, a completely different person, and it comes back the same $380 because the bucket, not the browser, is what changed. Most of what feels like personal targeting is really just the last seat in the bucket effect. Picture a fare bucket with 3 seats left in it. 2 other travelers, complete strangers, book those seats while someone else is still deciding whether to buy. The system closes that bucket the instant it empties, and the next search anyone runs, including that same undecided traveler 5 minutes later, returns the next bucket up in price. Nobody followed anybody. Somebody else just bought the seat. Layer competitive repricing on top of that, and it gets messier. Airlines run automated fare matching against competitors on the same route. So if one carrier drops a fare on a Tuesday morning, several rivals can reprice that same route within hours, sometimes faster. Combine an emptying bucket with a competitor's price change, and a fare alert on the same phone same login, same cookies fully intact, and the price can shift twice in a single day. That's not surveillance. That's dynamic pricing doing exactly the job it was built to do, matching live inventory against live competitions, refreshed continuously through the day. None of that means identity is completely irrelevant to what shows up on screen. It's just not doing what the cookie myth claims. Loyalty status is real personalizations. A logged-in frequent flyer or a traveler booking under a corporate negotiated contract code genuinely can see a different fare than an anonymous search, because those are separate fare products found by the airline on purpose, not some quiet penalty for browsing history. Ancillary pricing moves around too. Seat selection fees, checked bag costs, priority boarding, and airlines test and vary those more than the base ticket price itself. They run the same kind of upsell and bundle experiments that most online retailers run, showing different combinations to different segments of shoppers to see what converts. That's product testing, not a browser cookie deciding someone's worth more. The biggest legitimate source of what looks like personalized pricing is currency and point of sale. Airlines file different base fares depending on the market of sale, meaning the country or region a booking is treated as originating from, and that's usually inferred from IP geolocation, from which country domain of the airline site someone landed on, or from billing details entered at checkout. A route price for one country's fare filing can be genuinely cheaper or more expensive than the exact same route filed for another market, for reasons tied to local competition, local taxes, and currency, not the individual person doing the shopping. Take a route priced in two different currencies as a concrete example. A flight filed for sale in one country's market might come back around $600, while the identical seat on the identical plane, filed for sale in a different country's market, might come back around $500 once converted. That's not one shopper being favored over another. It's two separate fare filings sitting in two separate markets, priced against different local competitors and different local tax structures. And both of them are legitimate published fares that the airline actually intends to sell at those numbers to travelers who genuinely qualify as being in that market. Because that gap is real. An idea circulates constantly that routing traffic through a VPN or a proxy to appear to browse from a cheaper country can surface a lower fare. Sometimes it genuinely does. The search results page can show a smaller number. What it usually doesn't do is let anyone actually complete that booking at that price. And that gap between what the search shows and what the checkout allows is where a lot of people trip. Airlines and their payment processors cross-check the point of sale against the card's issuing country, the billing address on file, and often device and browser signals collected right at checkout. A mismatch between the country a search appears to come from and the country a payment card was issued in is a well-known fraud and arbitrary signal. And it's exactly the kind of thing airline risk teams and payment gateways are built to screen for before a booking is ever confirmed, not after the fact. When that mismatch gets flagged, the outcomes aren't subtle. The ticket can get held for manual review, the transaction can get declined outright at the payment step. Or, worst case for the traveler, the booking goes through and then gets invalidated after the fact under the fare rules they agreed to when they clicked buy. It's less a loophole waiting to be exploited and more a mismatch that gets caught downstream, which is why the casual just use a VPN advice that floats around forums badly undersells how much verification actually happens at the payment layer. There's a second fight happening behind every fare search that's less visible to the average traveler, and it's closer to the kind of infrastructure I actually work around day to day. Most of the fares shown on comparison sites and fare alert tools aren't typed in by a human sitting at a keyboard. They're pulled automatically by scripts querying airline systems directly or querying the global distribution systems, platforms like Sabre, Amadeus, and Travelport that airlines use to push their inventory out to travel agencies and search engines at scale. That constant automated querying costs airlines real money to serve, and at high enough volume it can actually distort the revenue management system's read on demand. A flood of searches for one particular route can look statistically like a flood of real interest and nudge the forecasting model, even though not a single one of those searches turns into an actual booking. Airlines have a genuine business incentive to tell that scraping traffic apart from real shoppers, and this is where the bot detection layer comes in. The toolkit they use is the same one used across most of online retail. Rate limiting by IP address and by session, so no single source can hammer the search endpoint indefinitely. TLS and browser fingerprinting, designed to catch headless browsers and automated clients that don't quite look or behave like a real person holding a real phone. Fifty and behavioral challenges that kick in the moment a request pattern looks scripted rather than human. Things like requests arriving at inhumanly regular intervals. And on top of all that, formal epi-metering agreements between airlines and their GDS partners that cap exactly how many queries a given distributor is allowed to make in a given window. I've sat on the other side of exactly that kind of defense stack, testing how far a scraping setup can go before it trips a wall. Spin up too many identical-looking sessions from the same subnet and the pattern shows up almost immediately, request timing that's too clean, mouse movement that doesn't exist because there's no mouse, a browser that reports itself as Chrome but doesn't quite behave like Chrome under the hood. Airlines and the analytics vendors they hire for these build models specifically to catch that kind of tell, and the arms race between scraper and detector has been running for about as long as airlines have had websites. When a scraper gets aggressive enough to trip those defenses, airlines have real options. They can throttle the offending traffic down to a crawl. They can block the IP range outright. In more serious cases, they can go after the distributor directly over a breach of the API terms they agreed to. This is also, quietly, why a lot of fare alert and price tracking tools show numbers that are slightly stale or slightly off from what you'd see searching directly. They're working around rate limits imposed on them, not somehow bypassing the pricing engine itself. Strip all of the folklore away, and airline dynamic pricing comes down to a small handful of mechanical inputs. How many seats are left in a given fare bucket right now? How this flight's booking curve compares against the airline's own historical forecast for flights just like it. What competitors on the same route are charging at this exact moment, and what market, what point of sale the fare is filed for. Clearing cookies or opening an incognito window touches none of that, because none of it was ever reading the browser to begin with. That machinery simply wasn't built to look there. The one-place identity legitimately enters the picture. Point of sale and currency filing comes wrapped in its own layer of fraud and arbitrage detection, and that detection makes gaming it far less reliable than the advice threads floating around online make it sound. The real story was never a system quietly profiling one traveler sitting alone at their laptop. It's a decades-old forecasting engine reacting to thousands of travelers at once, defended on one side against payment fraud and defended on the other against the exact kind of bots trying to read its mind before anyone else can. The hidden systems that quietly run the internet, explained by someone who operates them. If that's your thing, subscribe and follow the rabbit hole. Because this fare bucket and bot detection fight is just one small corner of a much bigger machine, and there's a full breakdown of exactly this waiting over at hiddeninternet.org for anyone who wants the deeper cut. Subscribe to see how the machine really works.